Izabel Amaral, bienvenue Izabel, who's at the University of Montréal, not as if we're on the other side of the mountain. It can be confusing for people who are visiting. At the School of Architecture, bienvenue Izabel. She is not presenting Charlotte's.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Nice to see you all here. I'm really glad to present today. I'll be talking about a performance I did with 3 students when I was teaching at the Laurentian University before I came to be the director at the Université de Montréal. Merci. So the performance was called Dance in Geometry, but the title of my talk is Traduction entre le corps et le dessin d'architecture. So I'm very glad to be sharing today the result of this performance and have a few afterthoughts on it. So this performance was created 3 years ago, as I just said, and then I really have to say a few cultural references that led me to create this project. First, the circular dance. This is a photograph of my hometown in Brazil, and I'm really glad to be here sharing some Global South perspective on using urban space and creating forms and circles. This is Ciranda dance, and it's a cultural manifestation. Everyone just grabs hands and starts dancing when we hear the right song. I also had 10 years of practicing the arts of movement with Maître Georges Stoba, and particularly Aikido and Tenchi Tessen, which is the one with the fan. And this school talked a lot about not only Japanese philosophy of martial arts, but a consistent practice and also the role of the memory of the body in the expression of movement. There's also an influence in the idea of creating this performance of the multiple patterns that I've been confronted with in my home country, which come from the works of the decorated floors by landscape architect Roberto Burle Marx, which comes from the traditional Portuguese of decorated sidewalks. And also my own practice, where I had the chance of doing this project for a public park and designing the landscape paths. And those 70 drawings that my team and I had done are really very appropriated by the users. And that sense of appropriation is something that really fascinated me, how actually those drawings can be a source of interaction of the designers with the users on the site. So those are drawings of the local fauna of this park that is situated in a local reserve in the city of Natal in northeast Brazil. That's 4 degrees to the south of equator. Also, in parallel to the experiment of the dance in geometry, I made a traditional harmonograph, but a large-scale one with a pendulum, and trying to do some research creation on drawing and basic instruments. I forgot to set up my time. Okay, so in 2019, I asked 3 students to join me on an experience. And I asked them because I realized that there were many students in architecture who had a background in dance. So we made a boot camp, and it resulted in these 3 performances that were presented for the public and at the Sudbury Nuit Blanche. So I'll present them in the same order they were created and the same order they were performed to the public at that day. to make a critical return on this performance, which was the first one. So a wind rose was drawn on the floor, marking the cardinal directions and 12 other points. So this piece explores the circular movements of the two dancers in dialogue, and it was our first attempt to compose with drawing, dance, and music. It forced us to extrapolate drawing from its traditional medium and instruments and explore a coordination of the drawing to the rhythm and the length of the song. And the resultant figure of the dislocating semicircles form rosace, as we've seen in the famous Chateau d'Annet by French architect Philibert Delorme. So while interpreting this figure was not really the goal of our process, we ended up finding out that this was a very effective method to produce that figure. And we learned that apparently complex geometry forms can be achieved through a sequence of choreographed movements. So through what Richard Sennett called tacit knowledge, this piece connected us to the methods of experiential archaeology and the exploration. So we're really glad to have achieved this result. Finally, the best result of the drawing that we had was during the rehearsal and not really during the performance. We had to wet the chalk to have the line as best as possible. We also realized that when the floor is like 50% gray, there's no color chalk that works on it, and that was particularly the color of the gray on the floor over there, which is different. This is more like 55% of 6% shade, and that's why it works much better in the experiments that we can see the one-to-one drawings here at the School of Design. So let's see the other one. Oh, there you go. So that performance started from Euclid's method for constructing a regular pentagon, which is inscribed in the circle. And this piece allows us to explore the movements in space through a predefined sequence, which was developed by the Greek mathematician. But we also added a preliminary step, which was to inscribe an equilateral triangle in that figure in order to reinforce the drawing and the length of the movements we wanted to do with the song. We left behind the idea of making a square during the sequence or a hexagon, because otherwise the performance would be too long and not interesting. So those were some considerations that we had to do this one. But we also added a few elements like the circles that we created with our bodies to give some sense of ornamentation and develop a more interesting figure to doing the performance. But we learned from this one that there is a sense of accuracy that comes very natural in the body, and it's movements, and to create these circles, it's something that comes quite easily. And let's go to the final one. So that performance was created by Kayla Korp, who was a master's student. We studied with Professor Mark Beckler, who's going to be talking here this afternoon. And she did a case study of Borromini's San Carlo alla Quatre Fontaines, and she created that after the process that we did collectively. She created a choreography for the drawing at the scale 1, 2, 3 of the interior of the main space of the chapel, following what Panofsky, one of Panofsky's interpretation of the methods for performing that, the plan for doing the plan of the church. But so we were able to recompose the interior of the chapel, and also ended up by the drawing around our hands, the columns, and then standing in the 4 central columns and trying to think of the translation of the two-dimensional drawing to three-dimensional space and architecture structure. And our main finding, which is something that we were not expecting, is that you can actually create all that drawing with only 1 rope and a few knots that were used as a reference. And within 7 minutes, we had that drawing almost to kind of perfection. It's not so perfect, but we realized that the use of a rope with knots, which is kind of an archaeological finding, if we think this as our archaeological experiment, could be a way to actually transfer knowledge, like this one, with a rope with knots, from one master builder to the other. And to finalize with the final thoughts on this performance. So this performance were imperfect, but it allowed us to explore a sense of collaboration in the collective research creation with the ambition of bringing drawing into the public realm, making drawing a public act, and breaking barriers of the profession with opening up to a multidisciplinary collaboration with dance and music. I hope we have the chance to go further on this in the future. So we really explored drawing as a physical experience, and that goes beyond representation, and we have learned that the precision of the body and our natural movements have a sense of precision, accuracy, and orientation. There are a few possible translations that are possible after this project, which could be of pedagogical, conceptual, historical order. I've been approached, for example, for primary schools to hope to teach geometry to students, to kindergarten students or first year. So finally, the drawings are not a matter here of the products themselves, because they were raised after a few minutes when people just walked over. But they were really a process that mediated movement and experience in space. So after the song was over, that just walked over and hope the way it finishes. Thank you for your attention. Merci.
Thank you very much. That was really enjoyable. I was just wondering two things. Is the production of geometry in these an end in itself, or are these your sort of scales and arpeggios that lead to you being able to draw more authorially, maybe, your own inventions? And you were talking about accuracy, and at the same time we have all sorts of tools to have other levels of absolute accuracy, far more accurate than your bodies in terms of producing geometry. I was wondering if there was another sort of accuracy that was taking place through these bodies, a sort of architectural and habitational accuracy that was maybe more interesting than getting an absolute geometry. A sort of pair of linked questions in a way.
Yes, so it's like a piece of theater where when you play, you don't always have the same result. And we realized it was okay for the kind of drawings that we're doing, but it was the challenge of doing these geometrical drawings with very rudimentary tools. That was a challenge that we wanted to do and explore and see what we can get. So visually, the result was okay. So we were really not exploring a perfect drawing at all, but the idea that we could do a lot by just using strings, sticks, and chalk. Of course. Like the pentagon is already an extrapolation, so we're just making through the dance and the movements a more ornamented pentagon than what would be the original demonstration. But this was there are many experiments today that are very inspiring. They also inspired me, but I didn't have a chance to put them in the presentation, which is the field of performance drawing. It's amazing that what we can find today is with artists that really do perform drawings live. And you can see the impression of the body on those live drawings. It was not the method that we wanted to use, which is that one would be more like directly related to the floor and only drawings without any instruments. We wanted to add that some sort of instruments as a drawing tool to make it closer to our discipline. Thank you.
There's many questions, but I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to zoom in there. It's a very simple one, because yesterday we spoke about geometries leading to other geometries, erasing some, keeping some. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you have a notation for the choreography, or what does it look like when you're discussing between yourselves? Like, do you have the drawing with positions of, like, because there's obviously, as you know, a whole slew of ways of noting choreography. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, we didn't take much notes. It was really a process, but we had to go to that step on the song. And we had a drawing with colored lines on it, so we knew the positions, and we just rehearsed a lot.
Yes, well, if you keep it.
Yes, very quick, very quick. I just want to say that I think it's very interesting pedagogically, because it also connects to historical practices where the drawing was not the end, where the drawing is not the architecture, where the constructional process is the architecture. And if young students like this can be taken away from the computer and then shown how you can actually enact geometry one-to-one on the side, I think it's a very good thing pedagogically.
I think it's also interesting to travel by not traveling and redrawing these buildings in place.
What scale did the body give to the drawing? Do you know what the scale is?
So this drawing is 1:3. We had the measurements of the scale of the drawing, so we just adapted all the lines to make sure that we would draw it 1:3, and we knew the radius that we had to do with our bodies. But if you see the circles that I do are not the same size as the circle that another student does, because she's much taller than I. But the general feeling is that the two circles look the same.
Just very quickly, Isabella, thank you very much. And this was triggered by Nat's thought, and I wondered about things like traumatized bodies or other states of the body which might be more inclusive with respect to the possibility of drawing geometries as related to bodies rather than the perfect body, let's say the Vitruvian man still. If there just might be other encouragements for other states of bodies,
of course.
mad bodies and so on.
Of course. Of
course.
course.
Evolution of
Yes,
geometries, let's say.
Yes, I'd like to see this moving forward with other experiments with kind of able and disabled people who could perform these drawings or other ones, but also how we could actually reconstruct memories collectively for a building that was destroyed and do it with the community, for example. Those are some ideas that I have, how this process could help. Yeah, maybe at the coffee break, we have one question.
I think yes, because I think there's a hand there and there's one on the computer. I think I'm going to ask you to do this at the coffee break so we can continue. Merci beaucoup, Izabel.
Merci à tous.